My name is Prarthi Kothari, your host for the day, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you all to the 38th session of the Students' Journal Club and Networking Program. Today, we have the privilege of hearing from a remarkable young scholar who is making significant strides in the field of artificial intelligence and its application in the sciences. Mr. Ramani is currently pursuing a BTech and MTech in Computer Science and Engineering at the Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi. Since 2023, he has dedicated his research efforts to exploring innovative areas such as graph neural networks, spatial data algorithms, and molecular machine learning. His work has already garnered attention with published research in the Journal of Chemical Theory and Computation focusing on solubility prediction using graph neural networks. Additionally, he has several publications under review that delve into advanced topics like bonsai, gradient free graph distillation, and panorama neighbor search in high dimensional spaces. Mr. Van's academic journey is complemented by his impressive affiliations with renowned institutions such as DIKU, University of Copenhagen, under Dr. Panagiotis Karas, at Data Science and Information Retrieval Labs at IIT Delhi with Dr. Sayan Ranu, and at CCMB Labs at IIT Delhi under Dr. Tarak Karmakar. Some of his notable achievements are such that he has received a research grant from the Danish Data Science Academy, clinched first place in the Citadel Securities Quants Arena Data Challenge, and ranked fourth nationally in the Goldman Sachs India Hackathon 2024. With a commendable CGPA of 9.19 out of 10, Mr. Vansh exemplifies academic excellence. The significance of artificial intelligence in applied sciences cannot be overstated. AI serves a transformative force that enhances our ability to analyze vast data sets, automate complex processes, and make predictions with unprecedented accuracy. Today, Mr. Ramani will share his insights on undergrad research, which is navigating AI for applied sciences. Hence, please join me in welcoming Mr. Vansh Ramani.
So am I audible now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So hey Prati, thank you for the extensive introduction. And I think given the less amount of time we have, I can start my presentation.
Sure, sir. Are you able to share your screen, sir?
Yeah, I can.
All right, sir.
Yeah. So I think the topic which I gave, undergrad research, AI for applied sciences or navigating AI for applied sciences, it's a little general, but today I'll mainly delve into how I started my research and how anyone who's just getting into or beginning their research can find AI and its application for applied sciences, and then early on in their careers just find a field that interests them and make some contributions which will actually matter. The main focus will be seeing how graph neural networks, which is a very specific field in artificial intelligence, can help with applied sciences. And in general, I'll talk about two of my papers. So, as Prarthi very extensively already said, I'm a second year undergrad at IIT Delhi in Department of Computer Science, and mainly my research is on graph neural networks, high dimensional algorithms, and application of these GNNs and other methods for natural sciences. And recently, I've also started work on agentic frameworks, which is using automated frameworks for doing tasks using LLMs, etc. For right now, I work with Professor Sayan Ranu, Hari Prasad Kodamana, and Panagiotis Karas. And in the past, I've worked with Professor Tarak Karmakar, all at IIT Delhi, and Professor Panagiotis at University of Copenhagen. So, starting with the main topic, why do you need AIML, and why is there actually a requirement of AIML for applied sciences, for natural sciences, chemistry, biology, physics, astronomy, astrophysics in general, or any other field? So, I think I should start by defining why we need AIML and what's the main purpose of using such methods. Machine learning is the study and use case where if you have a very large amount of data, if you can analyze that data, if you can create inferences from that data, if you can make a machine understand what features or what things are important within a data or within some representation, and you can learn something from that, such that any time in future, if you have a task that requires a generalized approach rather than uh, some governing equation. If you can interpret that using machines, if you can use computational power of tools and methods to find some inferences, then you can advantage a lot. So the question is, were classical approaches to theory not enough that you require this new computational or rather were computational and theory both not enough that you had to delve into these new methods and generalize them as artificial intelligence, not just human intelligence? So in approaches of classical theory, we work under assumptions. These assumptions are really crucial to be taken into account because generalized equations may or may not have solutions. For example, we know that solving, let's say, equations for quantum require a lot of mathematics that the computational resources we have right now do not have the sufficient power for. And even if we had the sufficient power, we may not get very exact results because even small perturbations can cause errors. So, but one thing we have is in physical world we can do experiments, and with experiments the only thing we have is the error in the accuracy of our results. And I think those are more representative of natural systems rather than some mathematical equations that govern them. You can use mathematical equations to model them, but eventually how good it will be cannot be determined unless you physically perform that experiment. Given if you perform that experiment multiple times and you do a lot of stuff, the data that you receive from that, how do you keep some inference from that? For example, you run an experiment 10,000 times. Can you use something to get inference from that? Do you need to manually look at all the data and find some inference from that? Is there a general approach? Can you use maths? Can you use statistics? Can you use computation to find if there is something specific inside that data, or if you can create some inference? So in general, that's the reason we use machine learning. When data becomes too large for humans to handle manually, you require some generalized approaches which can be advantageous. um, Getting into a little bit more detail, machine learning finds its application in cell biology. So, as I said, it's toxicity prediction in developmental biology, in biology in general, for plant agricultural sciences, etc. It has, when, for example, you have a set, you have some inference that you need to make, then you can benchmark how well your model is performing. I'll give examples later in more detail. But eventually, it's the integration of multiple fields into one, where you can use your computational resources to make a machine predict instead of you having to manually go through some values. So now this is machine learning, and machine learning has a very broad perspective. It incorporates statistical methods, then it goes into deep learning where you incorporate something called black boxes and neural networks. So what is graph and what is graph neural networks? So let's say let's just abstract, in a very abstract manner, know what neural networks are. I don't think we have the sufficient time to get into detail of those, but neural network can look at a large amount of data. Now what's your data? Your data is a representation of something. That something can be represented by values. So let's say you have you do an example for 10,000 times and you get the result and all the parameters for those 10,000 times. If you want to predict the value when you do the experiment with some different parameters for the 10,001 time, can you use the generalized values that you've learned from these 10,000 time to predict something in future? For that you need this data set. And then the question comes, how do you represent the data? So in machine learning, representation is a very important factor. The algorithm that you use is very highly a function of how you represent your data. Now, why graphs? In general, we all know what graphs are. Graphs are a representation where you have two entities called nodes and edges. You represent nodes as some entity in some space, and edges are connection between these entities. For example, in social networks, let's say Facebook, you can say people are representing nodes. So me and my 2 3 friends can be nodes, and if we know each other, or if we have some connection, or if we follow each other on Facebook, that can be an edge. Now these nodes can have properties. For example, me on Facebook has a property, now how many followers I have, what's my date of birth, etc., etc. And these edges can also have properties like how long we have been friends, or how did we get connected to each other, etc., etc. In atoms and molecules, you can use them, you can use graphs to create representations. For example, atoms can be represented as nodes, and if there's a bond, can be represented by edges, and then you can provide features or properties to them. Similarly, protein structures, similarly product graphs, so what products are available, which products, and uh, let's say on Amazon page, one product has multiple recommendations, so let's say the recommendations are connected by edges, so you can create product graphs. You can get citation networks, that is, a paper is representing a node, and the edges represent what other papers it cites. And in material science, you can represent meshes and lattices using graphs. In graph neural networks, let's see what neural networks are. Neural networks are is in general just a function predictor or a function approximator. Let's say you have a large amount of data. As I started my discussion, you do some experiment, you have 10,000 values. Now with those 10,000 values, you have to you have 10,000 data points, and each has some number of values. You have to predict something. This something can be written as a function of all those known values, but you don't know the function explicitly. You can try to use some mathematical equations, but they get complicated so quickly that you don't have a generalized method to represent your inputs, your output as a function of inputs. In that case, you can use a function approximator that can solve these given 10,000 values as a system of equations, and then maybe try to predict what the final output is. And these class of approximators are called function approximators, and neural networks is a deep function approximator. That is, it has multiple steps of approximation. We'll not go into too much details of that. But what graph neural networks are, if neural network can look at some data and predict some function, that is map input to output using a function that we can use in future values to predict something, and that input data can be represented as a graph. That is the main application of graph neural networks. And why do you need graph neural networks? Why can't just neural networks work on such data? Because graphs have a very specific property. Let's say you do this experiment, and each experiment has some 10 values that define it. These 10 values, the value 10 that is having these 10 features, will remain constant for any time, any experiment you do. Let's say I do this experiment today and I do this experiment tomorrow. The number of these features needed to represent are just 10. Whereas if you look at graphs, let's say you have to represent molecules. Some molecules have 10 nodes or 10 atoms, some molecules have 20 nodes or 20 atoms. The size of graph within different data points is varying. So I need to maintain I need to find a new representation or find some embedding. I'll define what all of those mean. I need to find a method that can work on differently sized graphs. Now, graphs have one more thing. It's not just atoms as a data point, it's an entire graph as a data point. So it just does not have information about specific atoms or the overall molecule. It also has some information about topology. For example, what two nodes inside the graph are connected is giving us some information. So in short, my main point is that graph is a representation because it has two informations, not just the original feature information that we were having in other representations, but it also has some topological information that is encoded in the graph in some way. And GNNs will be used to not just rely on the this vector representation that I initially said and defined by these 10 features in a experiment. Now you also have some connection between these values, and maybe let's figure out how you use graph neural networks for the same. In general, graph neural networks, or the generalized field of graph deep learning, the two papers I'll be talking about would be one which I worked last year with Professor Tarak Karmakar at IIT Delhi on graph neural networks for predicting solubility in diverse solvents. And the other work I'll be describing would be my work on graph data distillation, which I'll describe later. So let's see what a graph neural network is and how does it look. We know what a graph is. I said that a graph is represented by vertices. Vertices are nodes, as I said, edges, and this x. This x is the feature vector or the vector representation of each node's values, and it's getting mapped to this d-dimensional space. So we can say that each node is represented by a d-dimensional vector. And there is something there are tasks of graphs. In graph you can have multiple tasks. For example, let's say there is Amazon. In Amazon you need to predict that given a person, what recommendations or for friends would that person have. This is called edge prediction. For example, you need to predict this person on, let's say, citation. There's a citation network that shows papers, and you need to classify that paper lies into what field. If it's a physics paper or a chemistry paper, that task is called node classification. And let's say if you have a complete graph, for example, you have a molecule that is representing you have a graph representing a molecule. If you need to predict some property about that molecule as a whole, then that is a task of graph classification. uh, Let's not go into too much details, but the main idea of GNNs is that you have a graph, you project the graph into some embedding space using some learned functions, and then you aggregate this embedding space using some aggregators like sum pool, mean pool, and then you use a simple neural network to get the final prediction. So in a generalized sense, it's still using a neural network, but the idea of graph neural network is just to create this new embedding that can be fed into the neural networks. Now, what is this task called molecular property prediction that I worked on? In a general sense, if you have a molecule and you want to predict some property, let's say you want to predict how toxic that compound is. Is that a really relevant thing to do? Yes, definitely. Otherwise, how do you check how toxic something is? There are tests for toxicity, but the best test is to taste, and that's not a good idea to taste some toxic substances. So you need to have one method which can, with sufficient accuracy, tell you that okay, don't try tasting this specific molecule; it can be very toxic. So if you can do some prediction like this, that would be really great. So this task of molecular property prediction is if you can just look at the structure and the properties of a molecule and predict something about it. So one would say that there are, let's say you want to predict solubility. You have a given molecule and you want to predict the solubility of it in water. Why not just dissolve it? Yeah, you can definitely do that, but that takes time, that takes effort. For example, you have a set of 10,000 solvents and 100, that's 10,000 is 10 to the power 4. You have 10 to the power 4 solvents and 10 to the power 2 solutes. That makes it 10 to the power 6 combinations that you'll have to check. So is that really an efficient way to do it? Do you really want to do experiments for 10 to the power 6 values? So if you can build a model which with sufficient accuracy can tell you what the solubility is, then instead of going through all of these resources of checking the solubility, you can use this model to predict it. Some example that's given here is you have a molecule, you represent it as a graph, you create these embeddings, and then you predict the molecule, the property. Property can be the metabolism, absorption, distribution, toxicity, solubility prediction, the energy or solvation energy prediction. People are working on force fields which are used in simulations. So I know people here are much more knowledgeable in specifically chemistry and biology. So I think these are very self-explanatory. The another good application of using these molecular property prediction methods is for finding candidates for trial. Let's say I have a model that can look at a drug and predict if it will be good for cancer or not, and I have a set of 100,000 molecules. Instead of sending all of those to lab for clinical trials or drug development trials, if I can just find 100 candidates out of these, let's say 10,000 or 100,000, uh, then that reduces the resources that are required in the clinical trial by a factor of 1,000 or 10,000. So eventually, what is clear right now is that this is a really important problem that needs a solution. Now, how do you basically represent a molecule as a graph, and what properties do you talk about? Let's say I need to predict the solubility. What if I give the solution energy as a property and then make a network that can predict that? Would that be a good idea? That wouldn't be a good idea because these have some directly derivable equations in physics or in theory which you can use to convert solution energy to solubility. So do you really need to use such a complex computational tool to do that? No, you need to use the most basic features you can have. And another point, if you have the experiment and if you have the capability to to predict or to do experiments to find the solution energy, why not just find the solubility? So the main purpose of me working on this problem was, what if you just have the most basic things you can know about a molecule? What type of bond is there? What type of rings are there? What's the structural information encoding in a molecule? What type of atoms are there? What's the hybridization? What's the formal charge? If you just have these basic informations, if you can predict some properties using just these structural informations which can be known without any kind of complex calculation or any experimentation. So in this work I created a featurizer which could convert a molecule into a graph, and the graph would have nodes with properties like what type of atom it is, what's the hybridization, or if there's some chirality, what's the degree, the number of hydrogens on it, and each edge will have features like if its stereo configuration is R or Z, etc., if it's in conjugation, if it's in some ring, and what type of bond it is, it's a single bond, double bond, and these properties will be encoded into the graph, and that will comprise of the features and the topology of the graph. Then the main idea was, how do you incorporate some more things very specific to this interaction of solubility? So we know that solubility is very strongly a function of how polar the compound is. For example, we know that polar solvents are good at dissolving polar substances, and the apolar solvents are good at dissolving apolar substances. So in short, there is some correlation between how polar an object is and how much it solvates, and it just makes sense, because to solvate something you need to reduce the or maximize in a way the absolute solvation energy in a way that uh, your solute that you're adding to the solvent can just fit inside the molecules of the solvent, and it can just stay there dissolved, and the interaction overall lowers the energy. So the way I went about this is, if you have this molecule of solute and if you have this molecule of solvent, finding how they physically interact in a system is very, very hard computationally. For example, even the current methods that we have for computational simulations, or MD, or molecular dynamic simulations, can work with a few hundred, a few thousand atoms, but to physically incorporate the entire system or simulate that is just impossible. Because let's imagine you have just 1 centimeter cube, or let's you have just 1 mole of solvent, then that is one Na of atoms or molecules, that is 10 to the power 23. So it's impossible to have computational tools just find the exact interactions of these, and then solving the equations of these interactions are all quantum equations, which again gets very complex. So to do that, I found a way to incorporate this interaction between solutes and solvents. If you have a solute and your solvent, the most simple way to find the interaction between them would be just add a virtual bond. This virtual bond would be at the point of most polarity and the point of least polarity between these, or polarity difference between the solute and solvent pairs. And this novel method we call mol merger, or this method is a representation for two molecular systems, a very simplified representation. And then if you can use graph neural networks for inference, then you have some physics. So the topology was already there, the features were already there. You also have some informed physics now. uh, Now once you have these two representations of a solute and solvent, and you represent them using this mol merger as one merged molecule, you use a graph neural network and predict the solubility. I won't get into the detail of the architecture I use, because I just these slides are really extensive, but I think we don't have the sufficient time for that. I see it's already 7:30. But in general, the idea is that once you have this graph created, if you can use some neural network or some deep learning architecture to create inference on that, then that will be really great. And the results in the end will show how good this approach is and how it beats all the other approaches. So now, what's so novel about this work I did? What was the motivation for it? And what people in the past have done. So GNNs in general show are the best method for prediction on molecules, because representing molecules otherwise becomes really complicated. And the representations do not encode a lot of information about the molecule. Like, there are some other embedding representations. There are representations using LLMs. There are representation using something called smiles. There are quantum representations. But graphs overall have this property of topology, which is really important in physical systems, and we know that molecules are physical systems. Now, the past best work for solubility prediction, or in general, the past works on solubility prediction just worked if you have a solute and you want to predict the solubility in water. Uh, there are some works, or actually not some, there are barely any works that can predict it for both solute and solvents, or give a generalized model that can do it for any solute solvent. One work called Novel Solubility Prediction Models by S. Lee in 2022 was the past state of that model, and that had some major flaws. The major flaws was this model could not generalize very well to a new solute solvent pair. Let's say I train it for 10 solvents and try it on the 11th solvent, it was not able to generalize very well. And that was the problem we aimed to initially solve. This was an unsolved problem. And the way we came about the solution was very strongly inspired from just not looking at artificial intelligence, but looking at it from a physics perspective. How can you create these new representations of molecules that can incorporate some physical property of the system, which the model can now interpret more? So let's say if you want to predict some output y and you have some inputs x, would y be a good function if you don't have sufficient x's? So therefore, maximizing the number of x's can, in a principal system, maximize the accuracy of how good y is. So in short, the main idea was, if you can find a good representation, then you have a good output. It's called garbage in, garbage out in artificial intelligence, that the best thing you feed into the network, the best thing will come out. And the way we wanted to do it in a generalized way was incorporating physics into it, and that's why we came up with this concept of mol merger. Going on to the results, we get a R2 score of 0.75. And the way we showed that it generalizes very well was, an R2 score of 0.75 means, it's a complicated representation, but you can say that the values were, or I think I can tell you the root mean square error. So if the solubility, or we were training it on log solubility, that means if you have solubility in mole per liter, you take the log of that, and in the error in that was around zero point 0.7, zero point 0.8, the root mean square error, which is considered good in general. Anything below zero point 0.8 is considered good for solubility prediction. What we did was we trained the model on just 13 solvents. and then tested it on 55 other solvents. And we showed that a model which is just trained on 13 very general solvents can perform good with these can perform really well on prediction of the on these solvents like methyl acetate, butane 2 and oxalane, which are all really important solvents in drug design and also industrially relevant for not just pharmaceutical industries but in general any chemical industries. And we showed that this tool could generalize really well. So the main inference from overall this is that this was the first project I did, and we started with a really complicated problem. And the solution that came to solving this problem was not just uh, going into representing molecules in the most complicated way or in the most inefficient way you can, or maybe just feeding everything you know about the molecule into this representation and feeding that in the network. If you can incorporate physics into in some way in these representations, then the result is good. And that would be my suggestion to anyone trying to get into research of applied in applied sciences using AI ML. Just instead of just looking at how you can use new models, more complicated relationships, representations, if you can find some way to incorporate physics into it, then the results just automatically go up. That's because that's how the system is governed. Now this was the first work that I did. After that, I started working with another professor at IIT Delhi, and the work was on data distillation. So let's just quickly look at the data set which I had there. It had you can see 65 solvents here in the test set and 13 in the train set. That means you have around 70-80 solvents, and I had around 1000 solutes. So that makes a very large data set. The point is, do we have the computational resources to train such large data sets? And that's how I got motivated for starting my second work. That the main idea of using these methods, these computational methods, is to reduce the efforts that one has to do and to reduce the overall, let's say, carbon footprint because of the extensive amount of experiments you do, reducing the amount of energy resources that are being used. So are these computational methods good in a way such that you can replace the already known methods with these new methods? They have to be energy efficient, they have to be fast, and they have to be good. So the next work I started doing was data distillation. Let's see what data distillation is. So we know that training these networks is really expensive, and by expensive I mean you need very costly A100, H100 GPUs, which are really costly GPUs to do these trainings on large data sets. And then you need hundreds and thousands of hours to train a large data set. And in general, we have really big data sets. For example, this chemical compound data set, zinc, it's a very famous one, has 750 million compounds. So after doing this work, I got motivated to create this method that could reduce these computational resources, and and create a generalized method that people can have advantage of on such tasks that require these heavy compute. So in short, the motivation behind this task of data distillation is: do you really need all the training data for creating a model that is really generalized that can perform well? No, I think you don't. And this task of distillation exactly proves that. Let's say you have a very large data set and you have a trained model on that, and that model is predicting something, it's doing some inference, and that function is called fx, and the data set is very large. Can you reduce the size of this data set and create a distilled data set such that when a model is trained on it, the inference quality is, or let's call it f prime or f dash x. If you can ensure that the difference between the inference is very less if you train a model on large data set or if you train the model on the smaller data set. If it's very small, then you don't need the large data set. For example, you have a data set of 10,000 points and training it takes 10 hours, and you have a data set of 1,000 point and training it takes 1 hour, and they both give the same inference, they both have the same quality of the trained model. Why do you need the large one? So that's the main problem of data distillation. And in past, people have done that by something called trajectory matching, and I won't go into details of what it exactly does. But in short, it's a very bad method, in the sense it's a good method, it performs well, but it's not efficient. If you have a model that takes 10 hours to train, these methods like gradient matching, they take 100 hours to train. So it negates the purpose of starting with data distillation, and these methods require compute much more than compute that you require for training a full data set. So why do you need these methods? And that was the problem we saw, and started working on it. So let's see what the problem with original or the known methods was. These methods that were already existing in literature, they already required training of the full data set. And if you already have to train on the full data sets, it's redundant to reduce the size of the data set. And there are some other properties which are slightly complicated, so I won't go into the detail. So our main purpose was that these three things are really important for creating smaller graphs or smaller data sets, which can be used for getting inference, and they are fast and have low computational resources. And we wanted to create this method that can work good for all of these things. So we came up with Bonsai. Uh, I won't get too much into details of what Bonsai does, because it'll get a little complicated really fast. Uh, but the main idea is, if you have some input graph, you can think of this graph as computation trees. Now, what are computation trees? Let's say you have a graph. Let's say I need to train a model that needs to perform, needs to know something about me. Let's say Vansh, I'm on Facebook. Learning about me, it will only aggregate information from my neighborhood. Now, what's my neighborhood? On Facebook, it will be the people I follow, and let's say the people of the people I follow, the people following the people I follow. So this two hop or two layer computation tree is representation of me and my neighborhood, and we see that this is sufficient to represent me as a property inside a graph. So our idea was, instead of looking at a complete graph, we look at the computation trees inside a graph. And within these computation trees, we find what trees are more relevant. So in a general sense, we wanted to reduce the size of this graph. Our main purpose was to create a smaller graph from a bigger graph. And the way we went about it was finding what computation trees within this graph are useful. And by useful, we defined this thing called ranking of these computation trees, and the trees which were on the top of the ranking were the more important trees. How do you get intuition for that? let's say uh, let's say there is Vansh in the data set, and there is someone called Rajesh. Now, Vansh and Rajesh both have very similar properties. They have very similar friend groups. They have very similar likings, very similar dislikings. Do you need to have both of them to represent the same set of properties inside a graph? You don't. So can you find one representative for both of them? Let's say I create this new guy called Ramesh, and Ramesh has properties similar to both Rajesh and Vansh. I can remove Rajesh and Vansh from the dataset and just keep this third person. So using that intuition, we created this method Bonsai, which could break the graph into computation trees, project it into some space to this ranking, which I said, and then create a smaller graph out of them. And I think, not getting into too much details of it, because yeah, I think we can look at the results of how good it performs. And why did I go about getting into this problem and solving this problem? Let's say there is this data set called Cora. It's a citation data set, and training, and it's a classification node classification task. So each paper has, inside this data set, has 6 fields. It can be a part of the paper, can be physics, chemistry, or something, and you have to classify what the paper is, just by looking at the uh, let's say title of the paper and the abstract of the paper. On full data set, if you train a model, it gives 89% accuracy. Whereas if you use this method Bonsai, and you create this new data set that is distilled to 0.5%. Now, what does 0.5% mean? If you have a graph that takes 100 MB to store, this new graph will just take zero point 0.5 MB to store, and the accuracy it gets is 83%. So for a reduction of 5% accuracy, I reduce the data set of size by 99.5%. So these are the results that our method got. And then how fast is the method? The full training of uh, on this Quora, the citation network that I said, full training of this GNN takes something between 10 to the power 3 and 10 to the power 4 seconds, whereas our method can do it within a span of few seconds. So, and these other methods, as we see, called GCSR, GCON, GDEM, the past methods, they take almost the same time as you need to train the full data set. But this method that we have created, Bonsai, can do it much faster than these known methods. So the main purpose of doing this was to get advantages of CPU instead of using GPUs. create a lower carbon footprint, use lower infrastructure costs, and then create a model that can, a method that can distill the data from a very large data set to a small data set and still give a really good state of the art performance. I won't go into the task of model agnostic, but then now the work which I'll be continuing is going into this thing called task agnostic distillation, which is right now the model that the method that we've created just works on node level tasks, such that if you have a graph and you want to do some node level tasks, in future, our aim would be to look at if you can do link prediction, that is finding if there is an edge between two nodes or not, and also start working with dynamic graphs. That means if a graph is changing with time, if a graph has some other properties, like let's say if it has heterogeneous properties, then if you can create a method that can do the same. So now that I'm done with quickly describing, it took more time than I expected. If I'm done with completely describing what my work is, I'll now go into how I got into research and what are kind of the key takeaways from it, and how can you navigate your way through starting research. After just a course I did in chemistry in my first semester at IIT Delhi, I found a professor who taught us the introduction to chemistry course, and he worked in artificial intelligence. And when I approached him to work on a project in the December or the semester break after my first semesters, he told that I can start working on something called GNNs or graph neural networks, and that's how I got interested. And with him I started working for 2 months, 1 month in December and 1 month long in the semester, and then we eventually did this work of mol merger, which I presented before the solubility prediction, and submitted that to ACS. After that, I just went on to approach this another professor at IT Delhi who works on graphs, and I started work with him since February. So past 9 months I've been working with him, and the work we I did with him, we submitted it to ICLR, so it's under review right now there. And then this last summers I got a scholarship from Danish Data Science Academy. That's a association in Denmark which funds a lot of researchers. So I got a scholarship from them, and went to Denmark to work with this professor on neighbor search algorithms. So uh, in short, the problems I found which require solutions that help me help me provide something which is not just on paper but can be actually used by people and can actually create an impact. So the reason my professor gave me this work on solubility prediction was that he was already working on solubility, and he saw that no good models can work on both solute and solvent. And that's a problem that pharmaceuticals face, that other factories and research labs that work on solubility, they face that they, if you need to have some kind of solvent for dissolving some solute, they have to practically try some solvents, they have to go through literature and use this extensive do this extensive analysis on a lot of papers to find out what's a good solvent. Now you can just use this method that's open source available on my GitHub, and then find out what the solubility would be. And if it's low, if it's within some threshold, then you can say maybe these 3 4 solvents are good, and then you can use them. After that, I realized that a lot of people are working on these new methods in AIML, but these methods require a lot of compute. So if you can work on problems that can reduce the compute, that will be great. Similarly, on working for neighbor search in Denmark, my the reason I found that was because in this work on data distillation, we saw that these vectors, when they are very high dimensional, finding neighbors of vectors. For example, you have a vector space and you need to find neighbors of a given vector. It becomes very hard. It takes a lot of compute. So if you can work on the same and then reduce the compute of that, uh, that would be really beneficial. So I think a good way to get into research is find problems that help you satisfy your ego in a way. You feel that you have made some contribution, and the contribution does not always have to be a solution. The contribution has to be you committing yourself and then finding a way to just advance anything that's already happening by a little bit. And if you keep doing that, then you can keep progressing with solving more problems. And now working on agentic frameworks, as I said before, I want to work on how you can reduce the cost of using language models, and then use language models for these tasks on graphs. Like if you use language models for predicting these properties of graphs, let's say if you can use LLMs for solubility prediction, if you can use LLMs for doing analysis on networks, if you can do it for analysis on tables. And that was the way I went about my research. But my suggestion to everyone here who's an undergrad, and they want to pursue research in as an undergrad, would be find anything that interests you. Go to the professor that works in the same field, if they're in your university, or if in their university nearby, or if they're in some foreign university. Just get in touch with them, start applying to them, talk to them, and just start working on projects. So yeah, I think I'll apologize because it got a little fast, because I made 29 slides, and it was just 1 hour for that. So the last 15 minutes I've kept for questions. So if there are any questions, please feel free to, yeah, please feel free to use the chat box for adding any questions.
Yeah, so participants, if you have any questions, you may ask right now in the chat box, and you can as well tell me in the chat box. So I'll invite you to the stage, and you can have an interactive session with sir. So in the meantime, I'd like to ask you a question.
Yeah.
So what future trends like do you foresee in this field of graph neural networks and machine learning?
Yeah. So I think there is still a lot of research going on in the same field, and in this in this in this place and time, or I think we are all very fortunate that we're on this exact point in time where there are a lot of open problems that require solutions, and there is this new field which is emerging very fast and has shown a lot of possibilities. For example, you guys are more aware about biology, so you guys would know what AlphaFold is. And AlphaFold is now being used by almost all drug design labs in the world to find the structure of proteins. You just give it the genomic sequence, the sorry, not the genomic. You just give it the sequence of the protein, and it can find or tell you how the structure would look like. So, and they also, the method they use also incorporates graph neural networks in some way. So I think this field has a lot of scope, and it does not take long to switch your field from anything working in chemistry or physics or astrophysics or biology, any field. It takes, I think, maximum of 2 months to know a little bit about machine learning, a span of 2 more months to just get into, let's say, deep learning graph neural networks. And then you can start by incorporating what you know as a physicist or as a biologist into this field, and give your contributions in the same. There are a lot of open source free courses available that you can go and do. And after you do that, I think you'll perform much better in these tasks than people who are just pure computer science people, because you have more knowledge about the representation than they do. You know more about biology, you know more about physics, and you can incorporate all of these things into building systems and algorithms which can perform better than just uh, brute forcing data sets, which is a method that's commonly used. So I see some questions here. I am a beginner from biotechnology ground. How could I start AIML? A good way to start AIML, I think, is just starting, or if you're in university, go to a professor that works on machine learning, ask them for resources. If there's a course that you can take in a university, that'll be a best way to start. If not, I think starting something in winters or summers is the best way to do it. There are a lot of online free courses available. For example, by Andrew NG, there is this course on Coursera called Machine Learning Specialization. That's a really good course. You can do the Harvard and CMU and Stanford. All of the courses are free, available on YouTube. So you can just search machine learning for beginners and start doing the courses. After you're done with these simple courses, you can move on to more specialized fields. So if you're using, let's say, if you're working in biology and you have a lot of image data, you can get into computer vision. If you have a lot of data like molecules, you can get into graph neural networks. If you're working with, let's say, genomic sequences, I know professors who work on using these natural language techniques like transformers, etc., to work on called something called PLMs, protein language models. So there's a lot of things you can do, but the most important thing would be getting the basics down and then finding out what interests you the most. Is it even possible to switch? Yeah, it's definitely very, very possible to switch. Almost all the professors I know who are working and are at the top of their fields working in a combination of natural sciences and AI/ML. They did not do it in their PhDs or did not do it in their undergrads. They started doing it after they became professors, many of them, because it's a really relatively new field. There's a lot of scope to learn, and there's a lot of scope to give your uh, feedbacks into what's already going on research, and do your contributions or take part in this going on field. It's very possible to switch. No, I would not recommend you. So the question is, or I should drop the idea of switching to AML. I would not recommend doing that. Although we need to realize that AIML is not the only thing that is there in research. Still, the classical approaches of or the classical topics in research are very, very, very relevant. And uh, I think AI should not be considered something to do completely as one thing. It should be used as a tool which can be incorporated in your ongoing research. So for example, everyone in the world working as experimentalist has a lot of data that they have, and in general the analysis they do on the data is uh, more statistical methods. What if you can also incorporate some deep learning methods, and the data that you already have in your experiments, if you can create a model out of it, that may not be very significant from a contribution basis on a research, but you can create models out of them which can be used by people, and it can simplify the work for them. I belong to a non-computer science background that is biotechnology, a roadmap to switch. So I joined IIT Delhi in chemical engineering, and in the first year I had no computer science. It was a very simple computer science course, but I did not have any computer science course in my first semester, and I also did not have much information about. I did not know anything about machine learning. I think even 1.5 years back, or around 15 months back. So it's very possible to start from scratch and then build a good or decent amount of knowledge in the field if you're very committed to it. So a roadmap for switch would be, don't think of it as a switch. Think of it as a new topic or a new tool that you're learning which you can incorporate in your ongoing research. Start doing online courses. After you're done with online courses, find what fields interest you. You can read books, you can read papers. uh, that would be my suggestion. And as I told to Nidhi before, you can do courses like machine learning specialization on Coursera. It's a free for it. It's a free course on YouTube, and you can also get a student discount on the Coursera website. Yeah, I'll forward the link of that to the Biopractify group.
Sure, sir. Participants, if you still have any questions, we have a few minutes still.
Yeah. So if anyone has any more questions later on, they can feel free to text me or email me. My email and my WhatsApp number, it's already there in the Biopractify group, and my email is available. I think on the it was on the brochure, right?
No, sir, but the Biopractify team can connect the participants to you.
Right. Please feel free to contact the Biopractify team, and I would very highly like to thank Prarthi and Vineet, who got me in touch with Biopractify and this ACS student club, and gave me this opportunity to present. Uh, I would love to join in for more seminars and listen to other people's stories and how I can gain advantage from their experiences.
Definitely, sir. Like, it's a really great pleasure to have you on this platform.
Right?
Participants, if you have any questions further, the Biopractify team can connect you to sir. So as we come to the conclusion of the of this enlightening session, I would like to extend a heartfelt gratitude to Mr. Vansh Ramani for sharing his expertise with us today. Your passion for research and commitment to excellence are truly commendable, sir. Throughout this talk, we learned about the exciting potential of AI in various fields, from healthcare to various different sciences. The examples you provided serve as a testament of how AI can enhance our understanding and capabilities. It is really inspiring to see how undergraduates like you, sir, are at the forefront of this revolution, paving the way for future advancements. So thank you so much, sir, for being such an amazing inspiration.
Right. Thank you, Parthi.
Thank you, sir. And so, participants, we value your thoughts and insights. So, to ensure that we continue to improve our sessions and provide the best experience for you all, we kindly ask you to take a moment to fill out our feedback form, which would be shared in the chat box right now.
So thank you everyone for attending this session. And as I said before, please feel free to reach out to me if I can help with anything or if I can assist you in your research endeavors. Thank you so much. And I would, in general, I would love to connect to everyone in the Biopractify uh, community. Thank you so much.
Definitely, sir. Thank you so much. And thank you all for your participation and engagement. We look forward to seeing you at our next session, where we will continue to explore the fascinating intersections of science, technology, and innovation. So, thank you, everyone.